Mr. Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works, begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. I'd just like to welcome all our guests. We're really glad to have guests here all the time, but I'd just like to caution you not to take part in debate. That means no heckling or talking or taking photos or videotaping anything. Thank you. Introduction of guests. I have a guest seated in my gallery. I'd like to introduce John Athanassopoulos, who owned John's Place on North Albert for 20 years. Please welcome John to his Legislative Assembly. Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the floor of the Assembly, we have some very special guests. They're from First Steps Wellness Center and their organization here in Regina that provides specialized spinal cord and brain injury rehab for patients. And so from directly that organization, Andy Schmidt and Sandy Marshall. And we also have Chris Lysenko, who's one of the founders of First Steps Wellness Center. And with Chris is Angela Matthew, who helps Chris. And we also have Jessica Fraughton. She is many will know, is a Paralympian who competed at the Tokyo Paralympic Games. And my understanding, in a month is competing again at the World Championships in Paris. So we wish her all the best in that. And Glenn Gable is a client of First Steps Wellness Center. So, Mr. Speaker, about a month ago, I had the opportunity to tour First Steps, and we had today several members from both sides of the Assembly, including myself, had the opportunity to borrow a wheelchair this morning, and from the First Steps Wellness Center, of course, and we were able to experience some of the challenges that those who require a wheelchair deal with each and every day. So it was an experience. I think some members are still participating, and we appreciate that opportunity and all the good work First Steps Wellness does in our province. So we thank them for being here, and ask all members to help me welcome them.
Here, here.
Recognize a member from the John Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's such a pleasure to join in with the Minister in welcoming this group from First Steps to their legislature as critic for disability issues, but as well the MLA for Regina Elphinstone Centre, where this amazing organization is located. I want to wish a warm welcome to Andrew Schmidt and Sandy Marshall, the leadership that are here today, Glenn Gable, Jess, longtime clients. I understand Jess was one of the first clients. Of course, to Chris, the co-founder, and Angela Marshall as well. Welcome to all these folks. I think myself and one of the members on the other side, most of the other members did just a half day of the challenge, but the member from Saskatoon Riversdale and I are still in the chairs now, and we had an opportunity, the group of us, to kind of get together and talk about the experience. And you know, we were reminded, Mr. Speaker, that the Legislative Assembly is one of the most accessible buildings that we have here in Regina. And we still faced a lot of challenges in navigating the space, things we couldn't even imagine. It was really eye-opening. I was having a chat with Jess. You know, I said, how do you go to the grocery store? She was like, I literally find the longest cucumber I can, and then I go around kind of getting stuff off the shelves that way. And I laughed, but she was serious, Mr. Speaker. There's things as able-bodied folks that, you know, we just take for granted. So I just really want to thank these folks for such an eye-opening experience, making it fun. I think I almost beat the Minister of Health in a race out in the hallways. A little bit of an issue with my wheelchair at the end. I blame that. But Mr. Speaker, such a joy to have them. I also want to just wish Jess the best of luck next week in Paris for the World Championships, and then again in a year. I understand the Olympics will be taking place in Paris as well in about a year from now. So thank you so much to these folks. Incredible work you're doing. Congratulations also on the kids program that you started in 2016. I understand that that's been a huge success. So please welcome, join me in welcoming these folks to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, I'd like to introduce two gentlemen seated in the West Gallery. Mr. Speaker, the first is Deep Pandya. Deep is the current president of the Sask Polytechnic Students Association. Mr. Speaker, he's just graduating from Supply Chain and Business Management course. He'll be graduating this spring, so he's just completing his term as president. Mr. Speaker, it's now come to an end, and I just want to personally thank him for his time and his dedication to the role as president. Mr. Speaker, with him, with Deep, is Stephen Jose. Mr. Speaker, he's in his first year of business management, and he is the incoming president of the Sask Polytechnic Students Association. Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to meeting both gentlemen after question period to talk about some of the issues with the member from Moose Jaw North. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank them for their dedication to their students, Mr. Speaker, regarding the student issues that they raise, and look forward to their continued role in their leadership, Mr. Speaker, and with all post-secondary students, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, post-secondary associations are a valuable part of our post-secondary institutions, and I'd like to thank both these gentlemen for joining us in their assembly today.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to echo the Minister's welcome to the student leaders in the West Gallery, to Deep and to Stephen, both the outgoing and incoming presidents for the Sask Poly Students Association. It's just such a pleasure as the critic for the official opposition for post-secondary education, for advanced education, to watch the incredible leadership that is shown by student leaders across our province when they're advocating for more accessible, more affordable and quality post-secondary in our province. It's a pleasure to work with all of you, and thank you so much for your service.
Here.
Recognize a member from Melville South Coast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to introduce, seated in the West Gallery, 30 grade 7 students from Langeberg Central School. Go Eagles. They're accompanied by their teacher, Laura Swainberson, who is a good family friend and neighbor of mine, an avid Rider fan, a community volunteer, and a very engaged educator. I am looking forward to their very intriguing and tough questions, Mr. Speaker. I ask all members to welcome Langeberg Central School to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to welcome 35 grade 8 students seated in the West Gallery from Marion McVitie, from the heart of Regina University in the Hillsdale neighborhood, as well as their parent chaperone, Carmen Lanigan, here to this Legislative Assembly. These students are grade 8 students from McVitie, and on behalf of the opposition, I'd really like to take the opportunity to welcome you to your Legislative Assembly, and I look forward to answering whatever tough questions you can throw at me after question period. I'd ask all members to join me in welcoming these students to their legislature.
Recognize a member from Cypress Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you and to you, I'd like to welcome Ms. Cherish Francis, community leader from the Southwest. Cherish is here today for a visit, and I'd like to just mention that she's the Vice President of Marketing Communications and Waka Innovations and owner. And she's the daughter of Chief Alvin Francis. I'd like to welcome her to her legislature. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to join in the introduction of a couple folks with First Steps Wellness that are here today. They received wonderful introductions from both members here today. But this is a real life-changing organization, and it would be wrong for me not to give a special warm welcome to my friend Chris Lisanko, the founder of First Steps Wellness. I've had the chance to do so before as well, and we had the chance to be in the wheelchair this morning and learn more. But Chris is an absolutely inspiring guy, Mr. Speaker. Born and raised in Sturgis, Saskatchewan, he was the best lacrosse player in Saskatchewan. I met him when he was a young education student, Mr. Speaker, and he was something else. He was rock solid and hardworking, and just an incredible athlete. He ended up getting recruited by Bishop's University, Mr. Speaker, where he went on to be the Athlete of the Year for all sports at Bishop's University before his injury, Mr. Speaker, that broke his neck, Mr. Speaker. He was back in nationals back in the day as the captain for Team Saskatchewan. He led the nation in points at nationals, Mr. Speaker. A remarkable guy. But what he did in sport, as remarkable as it is really a fraction of what he's done for so many others. He went and pursued exercise therapy, intensive exercise therapy in a model down in California after his accident, Mr. Speaker, not willing to accept his prognosis, and found mobility and movement that no one expected, Mr. Speaker. And then he brought that model back to Saskatchewan, where he's continued to train and brought those benefits back to so many Saskatchewan people, offering them hope and opportunity and independence and quality of life like so few would have expected at that time. So Chris, I want to thank you for your inspiring life. I know your journey hasn't been easy, and I want to thank you for the incredible difference you've made in the lives of others. And of course, Jessica, we're all pulling for you as you head into Worlds here. You're an inspiration to us all. And Glenn Gable, a livestock producer just north of Regina here that went through an injury and has had an incredible journey. We send our love and our respect to you and all of you that are involved in this very important work. Thank you.
Recognize the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with many members in this House in welcoming all the folks from First Step Wellness Centre and thanking them for what they do in this community and across the province. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly, all the way in from Pilot Butte, Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. We have with us Linda Dornstadter. Linda has lived in Pilot Butte for just over 4 decades with her husband, Ken, Mr. Speaker. My connection to Linda is through actually Ken's sister, a lady by the name of Marie, who married a young man from Parkside many decades ago named Doug, Mr. Speaker. They made their home in Surrey, British Columbia. Doug was my uncle, making Marie my aunt, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, both have passed on now, but that is my connection to Linda and ultimately to Ken. Marie's daughter is sitting beside her, Karen. Karen Golisano, Mr. Speaker. Karen and her husband, Paul, have joined us here today from Surrey, British Columbia. Karen being one of my many first cousins, but one of 2 first cousins that we have on the west coast, the left coast, whatever you want to call it, Mr. Speaker. Lived their life out there, worked a career in healthcare alongside her husband, Paul, and their children, Megan and Brittany. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Linda to her Legislative Assembly and welcome Paul and Karen to the Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly and remind them that it is never too late for Saskatchewan expat families to move back to the province.
Presenting petitions, I recognize the member from Regina Northeast.
Petition to the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan. We, the undersigned, residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. That the NDP Liberal federal tax on carbon tax continues to make life more expensive for Saskatchewan residents. That the federal Liberal NDP coalition government continues to be disingenuous with their rhetoric surrounding the carbon tax, and that according to the Parliamentary Budget Office's analysis, most households will pay more in fuel charges and GST, as well as receiving slightly lower incomes than they will receive in climate action incentive payments. Despite promises from the federal government that the tax would remain revenue neutral and that the family would benefit, the reality is that families are paying more than they receive. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action: to call upon the Government of Canada to immediately end the federal carbon tax and support Saskatchewan's development as a global supplier of food, fuel, and fertilizer. The below undersigned are residents of Painton, Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to be on my feet to present a petition to this Assembly calling for adequate funding for education in our province. Those residents of Saskatchewan who signed this petition wish to bring to our attention that the education funding included in this year's budget is wholly inadequate and will lead to cuts in the classroom again. Those who signed would like us to be reminded that the Saskatchewan School Boards Association, who represent 27 public and Catholic school boards in our province, they deliver education through 625 schools, have criticized this budget, stating that it further erodes education in our province. They note that the increase in school division budgets for the school calendar for their budget cycle is just 0.7% for the 2023-24 school year. Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that this year's failures come after nearly a decade of funding that fails to keep pace with enrollment increases, fails to keep pace with inflation. For years, school divisions have described a system that is already cut down to the bone. I'll read the prayer, Mr. Speaker. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to provide adequate, sustainable, and predictable operating funds for our 27 public and separate school divisions to ensure schools, teachers, and other caring professionals are able to meet the needs of every child in our province.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon, Nuwasu.
Speaker, I rise today to present our petition calling on the government of Saskatchewan to renew its 35-year relationship with Luther Heights in Saskatoon in providing affordable housing units to seniors in my riding of Saskatoon-Meewasin. Thus, the undersigned residents would like to bring to our attention the following. The Department of Social Services is cancelling the government subsidy for 50 apartments at Luther Heights, a seniors' residence in Saskatoon. The building contains 120 units providing vital housing for seniors. The decision to eliminate these subsidies reduces the supply of affordable housing to seniors on fixed incomes and creates a burden and stress on us all. Mr. Speaker, seniors across Saskatchewan are being forced to choose between paying more or leaving their homes and communities. We urge the government to reconsider ending this relationship and renew their partnership with Luther Heights. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully call on the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan to urge the government to reverse the decision to eliminate subsidized housing and restore funding for the 50 units affected at Luther Heights. Mr. Speaker, the signatories today reside in Saskatoon. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to again present a petition calling on the Saskatchewan government to provide adequate and equitable SED rates. The Saskatchewan Assured Income for Disability program is available to folks with significant and enduring disabilities with barriers to employment. For many people, it's their only source of income, Mr. Speaker. This program didn't see an increase in nearly a decade, which represented an overall cut of 20% to the benefits that folks relied on to live, to pay their rent, to get their food, clothing, transportation, all of it, Mr. Speaker. With this past budget, $1 billion in windfall revenues, folks expected a bump to the SED program, and instead they got $1 a day. Many described it as a slap in the face. Mr. Speaker, the other thing this petition calls on this government to do is halt its discriminatory practice of forcing folks on the SED program to apply for early CPP and then clawing it back dollar for dollar. In fact, the government has been taken to court by the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry over this practice. So with that, I will read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly call on the government to 1, increase rates, 2, respect the constitutional rights of folks with disability, 3, index SED rates going forward, and 4, provide targeted relief to those in deepest poverty, namely single individuals paying market rent. The signatories of this petition reside in Saskatoon. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to present our petition calling for universal access to birth control here in Saskatchewan. The undersigned residents would like to bring to our attention the following, that Saskatchewan has some of the highest rates of adolescent pregnancy in the entire country. That's youth ages 12 to 20 years old. That cost is one of the biggest barriers to accessing contraceptive birth control in Saskatchewan, especially among adolescents. That having consistent and affordable access to contraceptive options is essential for promoting bodily autonomy, preventing unwanted pregnancy, and saving money on sexual and reproductive health care, and that sexual and reproductive health and rights are human rights. I'll read the prayer, Mr. Speaker. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to adopt a policy making no-cost prescription contraceptive available to all Saskatchewan people. Mr. Speaker, the signatories today reside in Regina and Saskatoon, one of which is Pat Atkinson, this province's longest-serving female MLA. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize the member from Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Understanding someone's challenges requires walking a mile in their shoes or going the distance on their wheels. Wheelchairs are essential to the millions of people with mobility challenges. It offers users the opportunity for movement and independence. Mr. Speaker, members on both sides of the House spend most of the morning in wheelchairs to understand what using one is like. And I can tell you that, Mr. Speaker, it was challenging. Many of us do not realize how fortunate we are to be able to get out of these chairs as we please. This initiative by First Step Wellness Centre aims to give visibility to the estimated 1 in 6 Canadians living with a physical disability, bringing light to the restriction experienced by wheelchairs users and promote accessibility. This government was proud to introduce the Accessible Saskatchewan Act on November 15, 2022. The bill's purpose further highlights the importance of an accessible and barrier-free environment. We are committed to building strong, inclusive communities for people experiencing disabilities. I ask all the members to join me in thanking First Step Wellness Centre for arranging this opportunity, and to also thank the many organizations serving Saskatchewan residents by providing therapy and mobility assistance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize a remarkable Regina University resident, Laurie Campbell. Laurie is well known throughout this city as an outspoken mover and shaker. She's the Vice President of Indigenization at the U of R, proud Indigiqueer and Two-Spirit speaker and activist, and 60 Scoop survivor. Laurie spent years of her life finding her birth mother and siblings who live across Canada. Laurie was also one of 2 Saskatchewan contestants on CBC Canada's Ultimate Challenge. Canada's Ultimate Challenge was a new reality TV show that brought together 24 athletic Canadians for an amazing race meets ultimate ninja warrior-style competition that transformed the country into an epic obstacle course. We had a strong showing with another contestant, Kimber Bernard from Saskatoon, and a co-host known to this assembly, Craig McMorris. As one of the self-identified older contestants on the show, Laurie spoke about her desire to represent fellow Indigenous, queer, and Two-Spirit people of all ages. Under the guidance of Coach Donovan Bailey, she and her team Red competed for Saskatchewan. As a strong, determined competitor, she pushed her limits on the national stage. I would ask all members to join me in celebrating all participants in Canada's Ultimate Challenge and congratulate Laurie on her achievement and for making Saskatchewan proud.
Recognize a member from Melfort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and recognize and celebrate the month of May as the Early Childhood Education Month. Mr. Speaker, learning starts at birth, and though parents are the first and most important teachers for our kids, those wanting to partner with them in the process are an absolute godsend. So this month, we're glad to highlight and acknowledge those among us who work to deliver a nurturing and play-based environment, encouraging our children to learn, explore, and grow. Early childhood education aims to provide a holistic approach to enhancing 5 elements of our child's development, including linguistic, social emotional, cognitive, fine and motor and gross motor skills. Supporting our youngest learners and their families continues to be a top priority for this government, and we do this by investing in programs such as Kids First and Early Childhood Intervention and Early Years Family Resource Centres. Programs like these make a difference for our families and help ensure our children's future success. Mr. Speaker, later this month, on the 10th of May, Saskatchewan will also celebrate Early Childhood Educator Appreciation Day. Early childhood educators provide an essential role working with the parents to lay the foundation of lifelong learning for children. The work they do has a profound impact and influence on our next generation. So to the thousands of early childhood educators working in child care centres, homes, and early learning programs across our province, we want to say thank you, and I invite all the members to celebrate their commitment to our children and the important work that they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member from Regina Rosemont.
I rise today to recognize some invaluable donations to the Regina Food Bank. Ken Tatarlyov farms near Minton, operating as Surprise Valley Farms. He recently donated 25 tons of peas to the food bank, roughly 20% of his crop. Ken said this: "We shouldn't be hungry here in Canada in this day and age." This is an inspiring story of a producer giving back to those less fortunate. I also want to thank Murad El-Khatib and AGT Foods for stepping up to process the peas. The local owners and staff of Tim Hortons deserve a special shout-out. From their Smile Cookie campaign last fall, they donated $193,000, securing over 550,000 meals. It will now be an annual spring event. It's on this week, so go out and get some Smile cookies. 100% of the proceeds go to the Regina Food Bank. The Regina Food Bank is addressing record food insecurity. They feed over 12,000 people a month in Regina without any government funding. They rely on community, which is why I ask all to join with me in thanking all of the donors and to recognize all those selfless acts of compassion and humanity. And I ask all in this assembly to step up and prioritize addressing food insecurity in Saskatchewan with lasting solutions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Athabasca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand in the House today to recognize Mental Health Week. About 1 in 5 Canadians experience mental illness. We all know someone who has and continues to struggle with their mental health. I'd also like to acknowledge that May 3rd is Maternal Mental Health Day, which our province has recognized for the last 10 years. Mr. Speaker, 20% of new mothers in Saskatchewan experience some type of maternal mental health illness, including depression and/or anxiety during their pregnancy or within the first 12 months following childbirth. Mr. Speaker, we are building on recent investments to ensure mothers and anyone else experiencing mental health challenges has timely access to the health services and support that they need. I want to emphasize the importance of reaching out for help if you need it. Some of the services available to residents are walk-in counseling services through Family Services Saskatchewan and access to registered psychiatric nurses and social workers through Saskatchewan Healthline 811. Mr. Speaker, residents can also access the Kids Help Phone and mobile crisis phone lines, and of course, in cases of emergency, SAS 911. I ask that fellow members join me in recognizing this week as Mental Health Week in Saskatchewan. During this important week, I want to remind my colleagues that we all have a responsibility to wear awareness on mental health issues and work to reduce the stigma associated with mental illness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Willow Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great day in Saskatoon, Willow Grove. I am pleased to announce that the University of Saskatchewan's College of Medicine saw the best in Canada success with the Canadian Resident Matching Services National Residency Selection Process. Saskatchewan is the only jurisdiction in Canada to have all family medicine residency seats filled in the first round of the match this year. Since 2007, the number of residency seats in the province has more than doubled, from 60 to 128. And it's not just family medicine residency seats, Mr. Speaker. All of the 128 medical residency seats posted in Saskatchewan this year have been filled. Of these 128 seats, 54 were filled by medical students graduating from the University of Saskatchewan's College of Medicine, and an additional 43 seats have been filled by international medical graduates. On average, nearly 80% of family medicine residents who train in Saskatchewan stay and practice in the province once their residency is complete. The other thing that has increased since 2007 is the number of physicians in Saskatchewan. There are over 1,000 more physicians practicing in the province than there were in 2007. Our government is very pleased with the success of this year's CARMS match, and we look forward to our newest medical graduates joining Saskatchewan's healthcare workforce. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, it's no wonder no one can take the NDP opposition seriously. They can't keep a consistent position on important issues like the carbon tax and provincial control over our natural resources. Mr. Speaker, our government recently introduced Bill 124, giving municipalities the ability to allow liquor consumption in municipal parks. On March 21st, the NDP SLGA critic said he supports this change. He said, and I quote, "Bill 124 is indeed a welcome and modernization of liquor laws in Saskatchewan. The bill moves to allow municipalities the discretion to designate spaces where public consumption of alcohol can be allowed. This is a welcome modernization and a quality of life booster for the people of Saskatchewan." End quote. Seems like a very reasonable and clear position for the opposition to take. Crystal clear, one might even say. But hold on.
Hold on.
All of a sudden, the member for Saskatoon-Nutana is saying exactly the opposite. In a Facebook post last Friday, she's now saying her colleague, the NDP critic for this area, is dead wrong. And she opposes municipalities being able to allow alcohol consumption in parks. Kind of reminds me of the time the NDP condemned all the unmasked people enjoying a beer in Pill Country and then posted a selfie for themselves unmasked enjoying a beer in Pill Country. I think you could say the same thing about the NDP's position.
Question period.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
On Saturday, Mr. Speaker, thousands of teachers and their supporters came to this building to raise their voices in support of public education. But no one from that tired and out-of-touch government even bothered to show up. Yesterday, the Premier said that they had been heard. Now, Mr. Speaker, if that's the case, the Premier needs to put his money where his mouth is. When will the Premier ensure that public education has the support that teachers, parents, and the students are asking for?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would first and foremost say that it is not my money. Mr. Speaker, it is the people's money that is invested in our children's education. Mr. Speaker, and I would also say that the people of Saskatchewan on a per capita basis invest more into K-12 education than anywhere else in the nation of Canada, Mr. Speaker. An investment we most assuredly are proud of, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes, I would say that if you attended the rally this past Saturday, that yes, this is a government that did listen to you not only on Saturday but in the lead-up to that event. This is a government that most certainly listens to parents, listens to educators, listens to school board trustees across the province, Mr. Speaker. And that is why this is a government that increased the education budget at the time of in the budget, Mr. Speaker, by some 6.7%. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we made the commitment yesterday as a government to engage with the school divisions over the course of the next number of weeks, Mr. Speaker. And when there is a need due to the population growth that our province is experiencing, Mr. Speaker, the student population growth that is appearing in our schools, Mr. Speaker, we provided interim funding last year, and we are going to provide that interim funding again this year.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it shouldn't take thousands and thousands of people to come to this building to shame that Premier into funding our kids' classrooms, and certainly not when they're sitting on $1 billion of windfall revenue. For a decade, this government has served up year after year of declining per-student funding, forcing teachers in this province to do more and more with less and less. Now, why is this tired and out-of-touch government, again, forcing cuts onto school divisions, especially when their budget is in the black?
Recognize the Premier.
Not only were those voices heard at the rally this past Saturday, but long in anticipation, or long prior to that, Mr. Speaker, from parents, from teachers, from trustees, Mr. Speaker. And I would just say this. Last year, Mr. Speaker, when there was $15.5 million added to the education budget, there was no rally, Mr. Speaker. That was through conversations that the Minister of Education and other members on this side had with folks and parents and teachers across this province. Last year, when there was $20 million added mid-year, Mr. Speaker, there was no rally that precipitated that. That came from conversations that were happening between the people of this province, not a couple thousand that arrived here alone, Mr. Speaker, but thousands and tens of thousands of people across this province, Mr. Speaker, through the pandemic. When there was $155 million provided to school divisions, there was no rally, Mr. Speaker. That was there to support our kids' future, to support our K-12 education system. In fact, one of the first policies that I moved on when I was provided with the honour of this office, Mr. Speaker, was to provide $30 million to increase the educational assistance in our classrooms in community after community across this province, Mr. Speaker. We'll stand on our record. We'll stand on, Mr. Speaker, the record of the people of this province with their largest in the nation per capita funding in our K-12 education system in this province.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I hate to break it to the Premier, but those people didn't show up for a thank you parade. They showed up because this government is failing to deliver when it comes to public education. This budget, the budget that he speaks of, gave a 0.7% increase to public education that is forcing cuts to school divisions across the province. Mr. Speaker, but don't expect cuts in qualified independent schools. No, because those schools received an increase of 25% from this tired and out-of-touch government, even after we heard stories of abuse in some of those schools. To the Premier, how is it fair that qualified independent schools are receiving a 25% increase while public schools got 0.7?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to be clear, a 6.7% increase in the education budget, Mr. Speaker, from last year. Mr. Speaker, as well, I'll say this in terms of the qualified independent schools, Mr. Speaker.
Listen up.
We went from 18 to 20 qualified independent schools that are funded now through the qualified independent category, Mr. Speaker. One of those was previously funded under a different envelope, Mr. Speaker. That's Saskatoon Christian School, Mr. Speaker. So that's not new funding, Mr. Speaker. And there is an additional, a brand new qualified independent school that receives 50% of what the average is, Mr. Speaker, across the piece for public education, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I think the question, though, is to the members opposite, would they not provide choice in education? Would they not provide parents the choice to be able to choose where they want to educate their children based on the needs of that family, Mr. Speaker? Is that the position opposite, that all of that funding would be lost and that choice wouldn't be provided, Mr. Speaker?
Hear, hear.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
I'll tell you what we choose. We choose adequate, sustainable, predictable funding for our publicly funded education system. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's right here in the orders in council recommended by that minister. One signed last week giving $11.8 million to qualified independent schools, and one signed 1 year ago, almost to the day, authoring $9.4 million. That's a 25% increase for qualified independent schools, including Legacy Christian Academy, where students are suing that government and the school over allegations of violence and abuse. Why is the education minister giving a 25% increase to these schools while public education faces cuts?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes, the order in council does stipulate $11.7 million for qualified independent schools as a part of the overall $17.6 million provided to all independent schools, including historical high schools, which that member used to teach at, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I think he would even see that there is a role for independent schools in the province, Mr. Speaker. I hope that role doesn't end when he stops collecting a paycheck from them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will say it again. Qualified independent schools receive 50% of the provincial average, Mr. Speaker, based on enrollment, Mr. Speaker. We went from 18 to 20 funded qualified independent schools. One of those, he will know that school, Saskatoon Christian School, which was grandfathered as a previous associate school, so that's not new funding, Mr. Speaker. In fact, they went from 80% down to 75%, Mr. Speaker, and the other is a brand new school, which parents have decided that that's what they want to choose for their own families, Mr. Speaker. Would the member opposite say that he knows better than those families?
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, we've got a tired and out-of-touch minister. We can now add desperate as he stoops to personal attacks. Absolutely, on this side, we do. I did work in a historical high school. I did work there. And on this side, we're proud of those historical high schools. Don't let him muddy the water here. Now, what he should be working at, what that minister should be working at, is making sure that our teachers have the resources that they need, making sure that our students have the supports that they need. But he's doing the exact opposite. He's only giving public education 0.7%, while he's giving qualified independent schools, he knows the category we're talking about, qualified independent schools, 25%. How is that fair?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're giving public education in this province $2.04 billion to educate people right across this province, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, $50 million for preventative maintenance and renewal. On top of that, $150 million to build brand new public schools right across this province, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we're giving independent schools in this province $17 million to be able to allow for parents to have a choice that would see those schools funded at 50% of what the public system receives, Mr. Speaker. We think that that's a balance, a good balance, Mr. Speaker, to be between providing education, publicly funded education in this province, and yes, where parents want, to giving them the choice and to give teachers the choice, like that very member, not a personal attack, like that very member chose to take that choice that was provided to him and to teach in an independent school, Mr. Speaker. We think that that's appropriate.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, if he is proud of that spin he's bringing here, he would have showed up on Saturday and shared that with the thousands gathered here. Now, we've received copies of the reports compiled by the administrators that this government sent into qualified independent schools. They're heavily redacted, but they do raise serious concerns about how these schools and this government fail to protect kids. The report found that in one school, they found a person who wasn't a teacher who had for years been acting as a principal, and that students with special needs would not be admitted to the school. They were being forced out through their admission process. At another school, there were multiple concerns raised with curriculum and with teaching materials. Does the Minister of Education take any responsibility for the fact that all of this happened under his watch?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I would invite the member opposite to look pretty closely at the lawsuit that has been filed, Mr. Speaker, because I would say that much of the time that covers that lawsuit, Mr. Speaker, this government wasn't in place, Mr. Speaker. It was an NDP government. So I don't think we should be, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to be very careful about casting aspersions, Mr. Speaker, in terms of who did what when, Mr. Speaker. But I'll say this, the member will know that the ADM, Mike Walter, who is a very accomplished educator in this province, Mr. Speaker, he heard from this member, Assistant Deputy Minister, Mr. Speaker, in committee just a couple of weeks ago and said, and I quote, "Overall, I was confident that what the students were receiving was instruction that was in line with Saskatchewan curriculum. During my time, I was to go through all the resources and see if there were resources that were considered significantly inappropriate, and I never did find one I removed or asked to be removed from the school," Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that comes from a highly respected educator in this province.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Then I've got a challenge to the minister. Make those reports public. Put that information out there. Should be transparent. What we have is heavily redacted information. Although we did find out that another report found that Legacy Christian Academy had so much taxpayer money left over that they actually created a reserve fund with the public dollars that they weren't using on education. Extra money. At another school, the government-appointed administrator noted that there was need for the school to, quote, transition to more effective teaching practices. All the recommendations for that school are redacted. Make them public, Minister. Both of these schools receive public funds. This is about transparency, it's about safety of kids, it's about learning. Why won't the Minister release all the recommendations from the reports in full?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in terms of reserves, Mr. Speaker, our public school divisions do that on a regular basis, Mr. Speaker. Does he think that it's inappropriate for public and separate school divisions to have reserves that were funded by the people of Saskatchewan? Mr. Speaker, in terms of redacted reports.
Order. I can't hear the Minister speak. Ministers of Education.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of redacted reports, and the member opposite asking me to unredact that report, those reports, Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I don't know how it worked under the NDP, but that's not how it works, Mr. Speaker. I, as a minister, don't choose what gets redacted and what doesn't get redacted, Mr. Speaker. That would be highly inappropriate. In fact, Mr. Speaker, these reports that the member opposite refers to, they may contain information related to personal information of a student. As an educator, does he think that that's appropriate, that I, as a minister, would unredact that information?
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Mr. Speaker, it has been many a year since a school division in Saskatchewan had more than a few dimes to rub together to build up a reserve. And now, Mr. Speaker, in the middle of a generational affordability crisis, Saskatchewan people can't afford for their bills to go up any further. And for months, We've been calling for the government to scrap their rate hikes at Sask Energy and Sask Power. And last week, they finally announced they were cancelling their 5% increase plan for Sask Energy, and that's great news, Mr. Speaker, but it's not enough. Will the minister commit to walking back the Sask Power rate hike that he put into effect last month?
Hear, hear. Recognize Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody shares concerns about affordability, concerns about energy rates. And Mr. Speaker, if the members opposite were concerned and genuinely concerned, they would reach out. They would reach out to their co-leader, Jagmeet Singh, and suggest to Jagmeet Singh that he work to have those carbon tax removed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you are living in a home that uses a Sask Energy bill of $85.14 on that bill, you will have a carbon tax of some $60, nearly three-quarters of as much as what the actual energy consumption is. And, Mr. Speaker, with regard to Sask Power, Mr. Speaker,
stand up for Saskatchewan.
Stand up for your province. Do what's right. Do the same thing there. Sask Power is largely dependent on energy that attracts carbon tax, energy that comes from coal, energy that comes from natural gas. It's subject to the same carbon tax that their co-leader and that those people support.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member from Regina University.
Mr. Speaker, that incoherence would be funny if it wasn't just so sad. People are facing cost of living crises, and this government is sitting on windfall revenues. This government that has taken millions out of the crowns that they control, out of the monopoly that they control. They're sitting on windfall revenues, Mr. Speaker, and they're not providing any relief for families on their power bills. 4 power increases in just a few months, and all the while Saskatchewan families are struggling more than anywhere else in the country to pay their bills. How does this make sense to that tired and out-of-touch minister, and when is he finally going to offer some relief?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, federal standards require Sask Power to pay a carbon tax. Sask Power has no choice on whether it pays a carbon tax or not. Do you want to know who has a choice with regard to carbon tax? Those members opposite. They can talk to Jagmeet Singh. They can talk to their other co-leader, Justin Trudeau, and they can say, this is something that the citizens of Canada don't want. This is something the citizens of Canada don't need. And, Mr. Speaker, it's counterproductive to moving our economy forward. I would urge those people opposite to take some responsibility for what they're doing, to take responsibility for what the member for Saskatoon is saying, what their other members are saying, because individually they'll go to a rally, they'll stand up and say, we're against this, we want to have a carbon tax. Well, Mr. Speaker, the people on this seat are all opposed to having a carbon tax. Look at what those members opposite over there are saying individually and what the collective voice of the NDP are in this province, Mr. Speaker. It's wrong and it's counterproductive.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have one leader in the Saskatchewan NDP, Mr. Speaker, and that is the leader of the opposition. And it is beneath the minister to not refer to her by her proper title. And Mr. Speaker, that tired and out-of-touch minister is raising costs for families and businesses. And it's not just the opposition saying that, Mr. Speaker. 52% of people told Angus Reid they can't afford to pay their bills. Saskatchewan people. The CFIB reports that power and energy bills are the top cost concern for small businesses. Why, Mr. Speaker, is this minister choosing to drive up the cost for families and small businesses? Why is he so opposed to providing any relief on power bills?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, the members opposite want to pick and choose what position they want to take. It varies from day to day, place to place. According to the member for Saskatoon-Nutana, the need for a carbon tax is, open quote, not up for debate any longer, close quote. She said that, and I quote, we know it's time for ambitious climate action using all of the tools at our disposal, including the most cost-effective regulatory and merit-based approaches, such as placing a price on carbon. The member for Saskatoon did not stop there. She also said, we don't think of carbon tax as a tax. The price on pollution is a necessary one. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not how it works. The carbon tax is something that's throttling our province. It is making it difficult for our citizens to pay their bills. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite sit in their place. They laugh and they think it's a joke. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not a joke. They roll their eyes. They think it's a joke. It's not, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from the John Alpha Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I can see why this government doesn't want to talk about education when we ask a question about education. They don't want to talk about utility rates when we ask a question about utility rates. Every time they keep coming back to this. It's desperate, Mr. Speaker. Our leader has been clear about our position on the carbon tax. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people are paying more and more every year for this tired and out-of-touch government. But those dollars aren't going to education, they're not going to better health care, they're not going for better supports for kids in our classrooms. They're being wasted on costly IT boondoggles that keep growing year after year. $138 million for Ames, which isn't even live, Mr. Speaker. Almost $80 million for Lincoln. And as we learned in committee just days ago, more than $25 million for my case to support the failed rollout of the CIS program. What does the Minister of Social Services have to show for this latest
Recognize Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, as a government, I guess as a society, we rely more and more on computers, it seems, Mr. Speaker, for efficiencies. And as we talked about yesterday, the LinkedIn system, Mr. Speaker, it has increased in scope. There's maintenance fees that go along with that, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if the member opposite thinks we should go back to the days when the NDP didn't know where their children didn't care where, Mr. Speaker. Old filing systems that took days and days and a lot of paperwork to be able to look after those files adequately, Mr. Speaker. It frees up time for our caseworkers to deal more directly with children in care, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, we're working hard to ensure our kids are looked after. Part of that is the LinkedIn system.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member from the John Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the minister knows well that his government's record when it comes to the Ministry of Social Services is not one of success. A higher number of kids in care, more injuries and deaths than ever before, larger percentage of Indigenous kids in care, and Lincoln is doing nothing to fix that, Mr. Speaker. And as we learned in committee, more than $25 million for a program that people warned this government would fail, and lo and behold, it has. The CIS program. It boggles the mind, Mr. Speaker. This government is refusing to listen to municipalities, to community-based organizations who are calling for increased supports, not more IT boondoggles, increased supports going to families, something more than $1 a day. But they can afford, this government can afford to waste more than $25 million on an IT system to support the failed CIS program. How does this make any sense to the Minister of Social Services?
Recognize Minister of Social Services.
Speaker, we've been able to support our workers and our children with some IT solutions, but we've also increased in this budget by $26.6 million on the income assistance side, Mr. Speaker. The CIS program, the SED program all received increases, $60 or $90 over the past 2 years. I'm talking about the CIS program, Mr. Speaker, $145 increase on top of the exemptions we gave for the affordability tax credit, Mr. Speaker. One of the highest rates of support we have in the country of Canada, Mr. Speaker. So we're working hard on that, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the SED program, $70 on average increase per month for individuals. And Mr. Speaker, under the members opposite, there simply wasn't a disability stream for income assistance. So, Mr. Speaker, again, because of a strong growing economy, we've been able to invest in some of our most vulnerable people, Mr. Speaker, and that will continue.
Recognize a member from the John Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, those wasted dollars could be going to classrooms, to hospitals, and to struggling families who need to make ends meet. More than 150 people in this province have died from overdose so far this year. Many of those people in my constituency, Mr. Speaker. At this rate, 2023 will be the worst year for overdose deaths ever. It's unacceptable, and this government needs to do more. When will the Minister for Mental Health and Addictions act to bring forward the evidence-based solutions we know are needed to save lives?
Hear, 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 hear.
Recognize the Minister responsible for mental health and addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this year's budget, we continue to build upon investments into addictions treatment. Mr. Speaker, $12.4 million into a number of targeted initiatives, such as here in Regina, housing supports through the Phoenix Residential Society, in Saskatoon to the Saskatoon Tribal Council, mobile services that are offered there, and as well, Mr. Speaker, expanding more treatment capacity, such as the expansion of 36 more virtual treatment spaces in this province, offered by EHN, a division of Edgewood Health Network out of British Columbia, to provide some innovative treatment to those in rural and remote areas of this province. And I would argue, Mr. Speaker, virtual spaces that can provide treatment to those that have difficulty accessing treatment for their addictions challenges, Mr. Speaker. That is some of the important work that we are doing in this province and will continue to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Why is the member on her feet?
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to move a motion regarding committee membership.
The opposition House Leader has asked leave to make a motion. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you for the leave, Mr. Speaker. I move that the name of Doyle Vermette be substituted for the name of Nathaniel Teed on the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies.
Motion moved by the opposition House Leader that the name of Doyle Vermette be substituted for the name of Nathaniel Teed on the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies. It is the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion. Carried. Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills, presenting reports by standing and special committees, orders of the day.
Government orders, adjourn debates. Item number 1, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 133, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Teed.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Nutana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be on my feet today on Bill number 133, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2023. This is a bill that's rather short in features, namely the extension of the deadline of the manufacturing and processing exporter and hiring incentive and the manufacturing and processing exporter head office in centre. That has been extended by a year to from December 31st, 2022 to December 31st, 2023. This is offering a non-refundable tax credit to eligible corporations that expand the number of manufacturing and processing related full-time employees above the number that were employed in 2014. The hiring incentive is $3,000 for each new employee hired between 2013 and 2023, and a head office incentive for companies based or head offices based in Saskatchewan with at least 10 employees and a payroll over $1 million, and 20% increase in employment since 2014. Obviously, on this side of the House, we support incentivizing employment here in Saskatchewan, particularly now with the abysmal record by this government, and in particular by this Premier since elected 5 years ago. We know that according to Statistics Canada, between February 18 and December 2022 that Saskatchewan ranked dead last. Our jobs record is the lowest in the country at just 3%. That compares to a high of 10% by the province of Prince Edward Island. It's an absolute disgrace, and we have implored the government again and again to take more constructive action. They continue to fail and provide that value proposition to attract and retain employees and their families to make Saskatchewan their home. A province that we are very proud to call home, and yet so many people have not made that choice, and because of the regressive policies of this Sask Party government, Mr. Speaker. Not only do we have the lowest jobs growth record in the country, we also have the second lowest out-migration rate. There was a net loss of 35,856 people in the province between 2018-19 and 21-22. Second last, Mr. Speaker. That is such an abysmal record. We know that a lot of resources and effort are going into attracting employees, and yet because of the failures of this government to address such things as our healthcare system, making important investments in education, and ensuring that cost of living concerns are addressed, that their policies are failing. And so while, of course, we welcome the amendments and the extension of these tax credits in the manufacturing and processing sector, clearly more needs to be done. And we will continue to call on this tired and old, out-of-touch government to do more to create an environment that will both be attractive to new people to the province, to businesses to invest, and for their employees to come and live and experience all the great things that Saskatchewan has to offer. And so I guess the only last thing I'll also mention is that we're certainly looking to see evidence that these tax incentives and these other initiatives are actually working, and that we continue to see growth in this province, and to move our ranking from dead last to one that is more reflective of the great opportunity and promise that Saskatchewan offers here in the province. So with that, I will conclude my remarks and adjourn debate on Bill number 1. Adjourn debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 2, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 134, the Education Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Weatherspoon.
Recognized member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to rise this afternoon and enter into the debate on Bill number 134, the Education Amendment Act. Now, my understanding of this lengthy bill, Mr. Speaker, is that it will amend the legislation to establish a new, or to set up the legislative parameters for the Saskatchewan Distance Learning Corporation, the Learning Centre, and further the work that the government has been doing on this distance learning project that they have been focused on. Mr. Speaker, we've been talking a lot about education in question period lately. Myself and several of my colleagues had the opportunity to speak with thousands of educators, parents, supporters, trustees and students on Saturday. You know, we didn't just speak to them at the rally on the Saturday, but we were actually physically there, unlike members opposite. Mr. Speaker, we speak to them all the time. They're in our communities. They are us, and they are our friends and family, and we attend a lot of the conferences and events that they hold and hear the concerns day in and day out, Mr. Speaker. What we have heard loud and clear, you know, less about the projects that the government seems focused on, and much more about the challenges around educating students in Saskatchewan more broadly, Mr. Speaker. We hear about cuts to support staff, cuts to educational assistance, and the impact that's having on classrooms. We've got classrooms of 30 kids, Mr. Speaker, with no supports for that teacher anymore, Mr. Speaker. That's the history of this, that's the legacy of this government, Mr. Speaker. We've got, we had a student come, if this government would have bothered to show up on Saturday, they would have heard from the student who was speaking about her experience in high school, how she was a part of an AP class, an AP program that has been now cut. She's been told that she can still take the test at the end, Mr. Speaker, but she talked about how difficult that is to do when you don't have the support in place, you don't have the teacher who can provide you with the learning that would get you to the place where you can hopefully get that credit. I was a benefit of an AP class. I took AP English and AP Calculus in high school. That was back in the early 2000s during an NDP government, Mr. Speaker. I was able and blessed to be able to take those classes. I didn't get the credit for the AP English class, the high school or the university credit, but I did for AP Calculus, and I'll tell you, it was a nice leg up into my post-secondary career, and it's a shame to think about those sorts of opportunities that students don't get anymore. That's just one tiny story in a broader spectrum of the challenges and the stories we hear throughout the province, but it was one story that was told on Saturday that this government didn't hear because they didn't bother to show up, Mr. Speaker. I know I have lots of other colleagues who are interested in entering into the debate on this legislation. In order to facilitate that, I am prepared now to move to adjourn debate on Bill number 134.
Member has moved to adjourn debate. It's a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debate. Item number 3, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 135, the Education Consequential Amendments Act 2023. Mr. Weatherspoon.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to rise and enter in the debate on Bill number 135, the consequential amendment legislation to the bill that I had just spoke about previously. I've already put my comments on this legislation and on this government's record of the education sector already in that discussion. Since this is consequential to that bill, I'm not going to add much to that discussion, and I'm prepared now to adjourn debate on Bill number 135.
Member has moved to adjourn debate. As a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. Recognize the Government House Leader.
In order to facilitate the work of committee this afternoon and this evening, I move that this House do now adjourn.
Government House Leader moved to adjourn the House. As a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House now stands adjourned until 1:30 tomorrow.
Thank you.